Hi, everybody. Dan Illman, Mike Beer, taking a look back at the Preakness Stakes. Mystic Dan looks to make it 2 for 2 on his quest for the Triple Crown. We break from the starting gate at Baltimore over a very muddy track. Mystic Dan breaking from post position 4. Brian Hernandez had to be very happy passing the stands and under the wire for the first time. It looked like he was getting another Derby trip.
Yeah, there's no complaints with the trip that he pulls in here, Dan, for sure. I think the real thing to note here in the run of the first turn is the horse on the outside, their Imagination. He broke fine. It looked like briefly the Tory wanted to get aggressive with him. I don't know, Dan, what do you think? He takes a hold of him here. He keeps him wide into the track. I think he thought he was in a great spot here, tracking Seize the Gray. He was wrong.
And Bob Baffert says after the race that in hindsight, he probably should have just let Imagination go to the front and carve out the fractions, but he had been working so well off of another horse like Muth, his morning partner, that he felt comfortable in this spot. Meanwhile, Wayne Lucas's Seized the Gray, seized the initiative, and Seized the Gray went right to the top and got away with a nice, easy opening quarter. He was able to have to speed it up down the backstretch, Mike, but he's doing this very comfortably and is not feeling any pressure.
Yeah, he's loose in here, Dan. Once he made the lead into that first turn there, he is loose up the backstretch. Imagination is not pressuring him. They're going to start picking up the pace right about now as they enter this far turn. But as they do that, Seize the Gray's got plenty of horse left, Dan. He did not have to work hard early at all in this race. They can't catch him.
Mystic Dan is now going to try to get to the outside of Seize the Gray. It looks like Imagination doesn't have much. Idling in behind the top 4 is Catching Freedom. The goal, obviously, to follow Mystic Dan. Mystic Dan right here has his sights set on Seize the Gray. It looks like the Derby winner is going to go right on by, but let's give credit to the D. Wayne Lucas trained Seize the Gray. He keeps on trucking.
Absolutely. I mean, Mystic Dan, overall, he had a really good trip in this race. You saw there at the top of the stretch when Hernandez got him off the inside into the clear in the two path. Mystic Dan had dead aim on the winner of this race at the top of the stretch. Dan, he makes up zero ground from the quarter pole to the wire. He barely holds on to second.
Catching Freedom finished third in this race. I thought also got a pretty good trip. We talked about it on the ride back up from Baltimore. It seemed that Flavien Prat was intent on following Mystic Dan, allowed Mystic Dan to get early position, and he followed Mystic Dan all the way into the stretch. He eased out at the 3/16 pole and was just a little bit flat while almost getting the place.
Yeah, listen, you can't complain about the trip he got either. I mean, in retrospect, you could go back and watch the start of this race, and it felt like Catching Freedom could have been in the Mystic Dan trip, and then maybe you can, go from there and try to decide whether you feel like it made a difference. They clearly had a plan coming into this race, and it's hard to argue with that plan, Dan. Once Move Scratch, Mystic Dan was the horse to beat, and Pratt wanted to follow Brian Hernandez Jr. on Mystic Dan. He did it. He had a clear shot at this race. He wasn't good enough.
We'll talk about some of the also-rans before we take a closer look at the winner of the Preakness. Mugatu finished well beaten at 17-1, which many would figure was a bit of an underlay considering it was almost 200-1 in the Bluegrass when he was off the board. His trainer said that he bled, displaced a palate, so I guess there's an excuse there. He's not going to the Belmont. Imagination's not going to the Belmont either. Again, Baffert said in hindsight, Frankie probably should have just let this horse run. And if he did, Mike, it's quite possible the outcome would have been a little bit different. Seize the Gray would have had to have worked a lot harder on the chase. You never know who gets the win in that scenario.
Yeah, you feel like if the winner of this race, Seize the Gray, if Imagination was aggressive and just wanted the lead, is Seize the Gray going to let him go in there, or are they going to hook up? I mean, those are things you'll never know because the race wasn't run that way. Imagination, listen, did he get the wrong ride in here? If you want that to be your argument, that's fine. He didn't run well in this race anyway. It's not like he got a bad trip. And then you just have to start going back and looking at his prior races, Dan, and some of them are okay, but how good is this horse really?
Uncle Heavy just didn't fire his best shot, and Butch Reed says it's time to take a little bit of a drop in class.
Yeah, they'll probably take a step back. He's still pretty good. He's still lightly raised. He saved a ton of ground in here and just didn't really do a lot of running. I'm a fan of his, Dan. He's just got to get a little bit faster if he wants to step back up and try races like this again at some point.
Just Steele was close to the pace. He tired pretty badly. He comes out of the race with a legitimate excuse, a fractured right foreleg. He's going to have surgery. It appears he's going to be just fine.
He ran okay in this race, though. I mean, he got a little tired at the end, but, listen, the winner, Mystic Dan, Catching Freedom, they were all on the inside basically the entire trip in here, saving ground. Just Steele on the outside the entire way in this race. Once again, that's kind of trip he always gets. He was also bumped pretty hard at the start of this race. he was in the mix in the upper stretch. He just got a little tired.
The Tuscan Gold ran okay as well for Chad Brown, considering it was only his fourth lifetime start. He didn't get away the cleanest, and he ended up running on for fourth over a racetrack that Chad said he absolutely hated.
Yeah, I can see that being an excuse for him. It's not an excuse I always buy, but this surface was kind of a mess, and he was the one horse in here. But just kind of felt like Tyler Gaffley on throughout the run. He was just sort of keeping after him a little bit. He had to ask him early. He was riding him up the backstretch. I mean, he didn't have a huge excuse trip wise, and here his trip was pretty good. It just felt like maybe he didn't like the track.
The Tuscan Gold are possible for the Belmont Stakes, along with the Kentucky Derby runner-up Sierra Leone, also from the Chad Brown barn. Catching Freedom, his plans yet to be determined. He ran just fine in this race. He ran just fine in the Kentucky Derby. He had good trips in both of those races and just couldn't punch it in.
All of his races are good, Dan. We'll see if they decide to press on with him again. Is he a contender if they show up at the Belmont? He sure is. I don't know if you would fall in love with this horse because he's hard to make excuses for, and it's not like he's going to be a great price. He's a fine horse. He runs well in all of his races, but he's no superstar.
Mystic Dan got the wet track he wanted, the trip he wanted, couldn't run in Seize the Gray. Is this a disappointing effort for the Derby winner?
I'm going to say it is. I mean, this was a great spot for him to win the second leg of this Triple Crown series. His trip was fine overall. He had every chance to win. He wasn't quite good enough. There's nothing wrong with that. He ran okay in here.
Seize the Gray will be heading to the Belmont for Wayne Lucas. Let's take a closer look at Seize the Gray. He's won 4 of 10 lifetime starts, but he's really put it together in the month of May. Winner of the Pat Day Mile, winner of the Preakness. Mike earned a 100 Buyer speed figure over this wet track. He's owned by My Racehorse Torres with just a beautiful ride. And from a pedigree standpoint, being by Travers winner Arrogate, a half to a stakes place Turf Miler, the Dam a stakes place Turf Router. It's the family of Power Broker, a grade 1 stakes winner, Miss Shop, a grade 1 stakes winner at Saratoga. Saratoga, he doesn't have to go a mile and a half for this year's Belmont Stakes. He only has to go a mile and a quarter, and that might help him out a little bit.
That's true. I mean, listen, he's not the kind of horse you want to be betting in the Belmont Stakes. He's going to be facing way better horses, and he's going to be doing it off of a triple-digit buyer win in the Preakness, where he had the softest trip in the world over a mess of a racetrack. I mean, I'm not knocking this horse. He pulled off a little bit of an upset here. He ran very well within the context of the race, but he had everything his own way.
He was the 6th choice in a field of 8 as we take a look at the prices for Seize the Gray, returning $21.60 for a $2 wager. Mystic Dan was second. Catching Freedom is third. Seize the Gray seized the day on a gray day at Pimlico, and we'll see if Mystic Dan is back for more in the Belmont Stakes. Remember, Kenny McPeak also has the very impressive Kentucky Oaks winner Torpedo Anna in his barn.